I'm going to be giving a presentation on our lessons learned from ESPC contracting at Fort Buchanan, Fort McCoy, and the 99th RFC. I work with the Army Reserve. I review the measurement and verification reports. And so we have 4 ESPC contracts in different stages of implementation. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the 4 contracts. Each one has its own unique issues. I'm going to share lessons learned from these 3 organizations, the 99th Regional Support Command in the Army Reserve, Fort Buchanan, and Fort McCoy. And Fort Buchanan actually has 2 of our energy savings performance contracts. So this is an agenda of all of the issues that we're going to go through, but before I really get into it, I wanted to explain a little bit about the Army Reserve as an organization for those of you that may not be familiar. The Army Reserve has around 1,100, 1,200 facilities spread out all across the United States. And so when the reservists, the citizen soldiers, they work their 9 to 5, and then 1 weekend a month or 2 weekends a month, they go and drill at a facility that's in their neighborhood. And so our facilities are spread out all over, and that has its own unique challenges. The Army Reserve is split into 4 regional support commands. You have the 99th up here in the northeast, the 81st in the southeast, the 63rd in the southwest, and the 88th in the midwest and northwest. The 99th is the region that has our energy savings performance contract. And so when you're on a normal installation like a Fort Bragg or a Fort Belvoir, you probably have one energy manager, a very small team. If the HVAC goes out in building 237, he can drive out to that facility and figure out what's going on. If, the 99th headquarters is in New Jersey at Fort Dix, and so if something happens in West Virginia, he's not just going to get in his car and drive down there and figure out what's going on. We have a network of facility operations specialists that visit the facilities, address concerns, write work orders to get things maintained and fixed. And so it's just a challenge to coordinate everything. And here, the 99th RSC, their ESPC contract involved 90 sites in 10 different states. And so there's a lot of people involved in coordinating the site visits and everything like that. So this was a relatively large project that involved many facilities that are spread out. So communication and schedule coordination was a real challenge. You have the 99th RSC Energy team, you have your Department of Public Works field personnel that are spread out all over. You have the ESCO's project manager, the construction managers, the subcontractors, the technicians. Getting everyone and keeping everyone on the same page was a very difficult challenge. And so you have to have, they found that having one point of contact helped reduce a lot of the confusion with regard to coordinating site visits and construction and work. Another thing that the 99th found is that they didn't have very good preventative maintenance in a lot of their facilities, which, if you're familiar with the Army, that probably wouldn't surprise you. And many of these facilities required repairs before the ECM could even be implemented. You can't install a building automation system on a building where the pumps don't work, because if you can't control a pump that doesn't work properly. And so they ended up having to do about $2 million of repairs to their 90 facilities before they could even implement many of the ECMs. This root cause analysis, eventually when you have so many people involved in a single project, You get people, kind of doing this thing, pointing the blame at each other. And so documenting all your emails, keeping your meeting minutes, this seems like a common sense kind of project management thing, but from the installation perspective, the energy manager, this isn't the only thing this is one of many, many responsibilities that they have. And so making sure that that you're keeping track of everything is also very important. Let's see. So moving on to Fort Buchanan. Fort Buchanan is the only ESPC we have right now that's in repayment. We're in the implementation phase. The other ESPCs are in the construction phase still. So we received the first measurement and verification report in April, and the performance period was for June of the previous year to May of that year. And so the annual measurement and verification report they had to estimate, at least 2 months worth of data to provide the report at the time the report was due, which to me isn't really measurement and verification if you're, estimating a sixth of your months. And so that was something that we learned, and we worked with the ESCO, and then we've since implemented a modification to the contract to get that date moved so that they're actually reporting on actual data. And the utility escalation rate, if it's an agreed upon price that the escalation rate's going to stay at 4% or 5% or whatever you agree on, and if the actual escalation of energy is higher, then you're really saving money on your payments, and if the escalation rate is lower, then you're paying more than what you're saving, and that's just a part of the contract. Like, you just have to do it, but the leadership within the Army, you have to make sure that they understand that that's a part of what's going on. And so the leadership was confused. They didn't quite understand, and they were upset. Like, why aren't we saving all of this money? I thought we were going to be saving all of this money, and like the escalation rate wasn't what we were expecting it to be. And so, and that's just a risk that the agency takes. The ESCO does all of the actual work for the measurement and verification. What they do is agreed on beforehand as a part of the contract, and the agency is given the opportunity to observe the measurement and verification when, but typically part of the measurement and verification is the ESCO going and like checking the systems and making sure that everything's still running. And so when they do that, they invite the government agency to accompany them as they go through and do those checks. So with Fort Buchanan, and every ESPC will have a responsibility matrix where you designate who's responsible for the operation of the equipment, who's responsible for preventative maintenance, and who's responsible for repairs and replacement of the equipment if it fails. And so for energy management control systems, HVAC upgrades, and again, HVAC upgrades 4.1 and 4.2, Fort Buchanan assumed the responsibility for the operation of the equipment and the system, and they actually assumed the operation of all of the equipment. And on the HVAC retrofits, they were going to do the lion's share of the preventative maintenance. And so we're going to get into that. This is just my notes on a section of the measurement and verification report. There was no impact to year one savings for the ECM 3.1, and I'm going to draw your attention down here to the bottom where there's no change in the savings because Fort Buchanan has the operational responsibility for this ECM. And so the verified annual savings aren't going to be adjusted based on the temperature set points being outside the ones specified in the final proposal. And so what happened in this case was, in the final proposal, the ESCO said, you know, your occupied set point is such and your unoccupied set point is such, and Fort Buchanan's, they didn't maintain those set points. And so if you don't maintain the set points, you're not going to get the savings. That's fine. Like, that's how it's supposed to work. But the ESCO didn't provide what the difference in savings was going to be. And so Fort Buchanan didn't have any idea of how much money they were actually losing, right? So if you're not maintaining the set points, obviously you're wasting energy and you're losing savings, but they didn't know exactly how much. And so it's hard for the federal agency to justify to their leadership that, you know, we really need to adhere to the settings in the final proposal if they can't say, look, we're losing $200,000 every year because our set points are off. And they couldn't make that argument.
Is that measurable? Measurable but just control or didn't do it?
Well, it was, in this first year measurement verification report, they didn't provide what those numbers were, but they've been really good with working with us, and in the second year report, they provided what those numbers were. And so Fort Buchanan now has a much better idea of exactly how much savings they're not achieving. And this same logic was used on a lot of the ECMs. Is, you know, you're operating the equipment. If you're the agency and you say that you're going to operate the equipment, it's on you to operate the equipment in the manner that you're supposed to. And so when you assume that responsibility and the responsibility matrix becomes a part of the contract, you know, that's you've got to do that now. That was a major lesson learned, and the same goes for preventative maintenance. The savings weren't adjusted because, you know, you weren't doing the preventative maintenance, you weren't changing the filters, you weren't cleaning the coils, and there's a savings deficit there, and the ESCO has done a much better job in this second year report of telling us exactly what those savings losses are. And then this is, I was talking about government witnessing earlier. The first report, they didn't quite do such a good job of coordinating with the site to make sure that there is a government person from the Department of Public Works there to observe the measurement and verification activities that were going on. You know, they just kind of showed up and checked in with the building receptionist, and that's not an adequate government representative, I don't think. So again, you know, it was lessons learned, and we've course corrected, and now there's a DPW representative at all the site inspections. So Fort McCoy, I've only got 5 minutes. We're going to go a little quickly through here. I apologize. This date right here, I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind. The original request to the Corps of Engineers to send a request for a proposal out to the ESCOs was in September 2012. And there was some certain things that they wanted to do. They wanted to look at photovoltaic systems. This is the full extent of PV at Fort McCoy. Is a crosswalk light. And so they wanted to do a little bit better in that regard. The site survey was in May of 2013, right? So 9 months later. And there was a list of all the things that they looked at. The feasibility study came a year later, May 2014, and these were the ones that they selected down to, the ECMs that they selected down to. And then the final proposal was in September 2014, And this is kind of a rundown of all of the things that they did. HVAC controls, they switched from propane to natural gas in many buildings. Ultimately, $7.2 million implementation cost with a 12-year payback. That's a familiar number. So they did about $7 million worth of work. The biggest issue that Fort McCoy is having is with the energy management control system. They are controlling 30 of their largest energy consuming facilities, and the EMCS was going to operate over the existing fiber cable and not connected to the NIPRNet. And so the NIPRNet is the Army network, and the Network Enterprise Center, they're the cybersecurity people, are very, no one wants to be the first Army site that gets hacked, right? So they're very diligent. And so I have it on this slide or the next slide? The agreement was that the ESCO would install their own network, and they would not get on the Army network. They would install all their own fiber and operate on their own network, and they wouldn't have to get accredited to operate on the Army network. And then the Army as a whole changed to a risk management framework system, and so now everything has to get accredited regardless of what happens. And so they got kind of caught up in the middle of this. They didn't include an accreditation as a part of the contract because they didn't think that they needed one, and now they need one, and so they had to go back and add that into the contract. They have to pay for that now. So we've been working with the Corps of Engineers and the ESCO to pay them to achieve the accreditation, and it's going to be on the network, yeah. And so, yeah, that's what, at the point in time I made this presentation, we were looking at different options of, do you just buy out the ECM? Do you buy out the whole thing? Do you continue with the controls upgrades in the buildings but not network all the buildings together? That was also an option. But they're going to go with the first one, where they're going to continue the accreditation process and pay the additional costs, which could have been included at the beginning of the project, but they decided, but they chose not to.